governance of genetic biocontrol technologies in Africa. And this being the first series that we are having, looking at regulations of genetically modified organisms. And this series has two main objectives. The first one is to provide overview of the status of biosafety framework in Africa, as well as guidance and best practices. And secondly, we shall discuss country experience on biosafety frameworks for genetic biocontrol technologies, specifically genome editing regulation in Kenya. Suffice to say that this webinar today, we do have a variety of audience. We have a representative from the science community, that's the scientists. We also have communicators, the medicines, and also the policymakers. I wonder if you can project the agenda for the day. This webinar will take us about 2 hours, and maybe a quick look at the agenda. Can you project the agenda? Thank you. So on the agenda, we are going to have two presentations. The first one will highlight the first objective of our meeting, which is the status on biosafety in Africa, guidance and best practices, and this will be done by Sunday Akile. And then we'll have another presentation on country experience on biosafety legal frameworks for genetic biocontrol technologies and focusing on genome editing regulation in Kenya. Now, before we can go, and then after the presentations, actually after each presentation, we'll give an opportunity for the audience to ask any questions. If you have any question, burning question, you can ask after each of the presentation. But you are also allowed to provide your question in the chat box. I don't know, I missed the other part because the other side was not audible when you are being welcomed initially, but we also have interpretation on the French interpretation, which we'll learn throughout this meeting. So without taking much time, let me introduce Sunday Akile, who is going to take us through the first presentation on the status of biosafety framework in Africa. Mr. Sunday Akile is a senior program officer at the African Union, AUDA-NEPAD. He leads the policy and regulatory development process in biosafety for the countries on the continent, that's the African continent. He's a seasoned legal practitioner with several successful court cases to his name in his country, Uganda. Before joining NEPAD, he was a member of the Ugandan's National Biosafety Committee for 5 years, sitting in the committee as a legal advisor. His contribution to the National Biosafety Committee was immense. This committee is known to have handled several CFTs applications, making Uganda the leading country in the sub-Saharan Africa to have conducted the highest number of CFTs in agriculture biotechnology. Sunday has earned a bachelor degrees in law from Akile University, Uganda, and a postgraduate diploma in legal practice of his country. He's also earned numerous awards in biosafety regulatory trainings, both from his country and abroad. He's very knowledgeable in the legal and policy aspect of biosafety regulation. So, Mr. Sunday, over to you. You will take us through the status of biosafety in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lillian. Let me share my. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are good to go for that elaborate introduction from the program moderator. I'm going to present to you on the status of biosafety framework on the continent of Africa. And of course, we'll then conclude with the best practices and guidance from our own perspective as an agency tasked with the mandate to support African countries in establishing regulatory frameworks on the continent. Discussion about biosafety regulation on the continent really draws us back to the early days when the discussion for having a global framework kicked off. You may recall, for those of you who have been around for some time, that before the global community came up with the Convention on Biological Diversity, there was a build-up to us having a global framework that could provide for a blueprint for the safe, for conservation, for sustainable utilization, and also having access to benefit sharing. Now, regulation has been central to these discussions. And you find that very importantly, because of the potential implications these technologies, the GM technology could have to the biodiversity and human health. So basically, this is the perceived unknown that gives rise to discussion about having regulations. What motivates this is that the convention has been part of it. The convention directs how the global community should move in regard to applying these emerging tools of modern biotechnology. Also concerns around consumer interests, concerns around the biodiversity, concerns around trade. All these have been drivers towards having a framework for biosafety regulation. That's the safe application of the tools of modern biotechnology. Now you realize or notice that in the midst of this conversation around biosafety regulation, there is a complexity of regulatory guidelines stemming from other organizations, global multinational organizations that also continue to play an important role. We will view World Health Organization that plays a very important role in as far as setting a global order in terms of in the field of medicine, human medicine. We'll find that there are frameworks that exist under the auspices of World Agriculture Organization, or talk about a safe application of foods that are made out of, that have a bearing of genetically engineered materials. We'll find that the World Trade Organization and the conversations and instruments that come under the auspices of WTO also do strongly provide for frameworks. International Animal Health Organization does so. Then our own organization, African Union, in the early years also had its own model biosafety law for countries to, member states to tap into as they think about developing their own legal frameworks. We find that today, standard setting bodies also drive the regulatory framework. We have the Codex Alimentarius Commission that quite regularly meet to discuss and provide for best practices, especially providing for food standards, guidelines related to codes that are best practices for programming, especially for food. And this has worked in conjunction with World Health Organization in developing this. Also, the Commission on Phytosanitary Measures have also endeavored to put in place frameworks. So in so saying, there are these superfluous kind of existing frameworks even before we began talking about biosafety regulations, and their conversation finding that they point towards the safe application of modern biotechnology, the tools of modern biotechnology, so to say. And we will realize, for those of you who have read the Cartagena Protocol, that the preamble to the Cartagena Protocol did recognize this superfluous existence of various frameworks, which are all in a bid to create a global order. So in its preamble, it does observe that in so interpreting the Cartagena Protocol or in applying it, it should be applied in a manner that is mutually supportive of all these existing frameworks, so as to allow an harmonious interaction for all this. So that is it. Now, that launches me into discussing with you deeper into what exactly do we talk about when we talk about regulatory frameworks. Now, regulatory frameworks, this is a conversation that won consensus at the negotiation of the Cartagena Protocol. Now, the Cartagena Protocol is a key protocol that is under the auspices of Convention on Biological Diversity. It's been specifically developed to provide a framework for the safe application of the tools of modern biotechnology. Now, at the discussion and its negotiation, the consensus that the global community at the negotiations had is that there should be a framework. And this framework has been seen at minimum to be built on some blocks where a country must have policy, a policy on biosafety or biotech, which could lead us to biosafety applications. Then there is bound to step up a national legislation. Then from a national legislation, you find there is also bound to be regulations, depending on specific or depending on the jurisdictions that this may be applicable. There could also be provisional or municipal legislations. Then from there, you'll find guidelines or standard procedures, operating procedures that run in that hierarchy, meaning each layer here can influence the other, more specifically from the top to the bottom, that each layer here influences the other. But more importantly, there are also policies at the international level. The conversation that comes up at the platform of the Convention on Biological Diversity is basically articulating policy, okay, before it's developed into protocols or instruments. Then there is an international instrument or a series of international instruments which could be developed to deal with specific aspects. So you find in that hierarchy, we have global policies, we have international law, international protocols, which then get domesticated in countries that move a step further to domesticate them into their national legislations. Then from those legislations, you find regulations are developed to implement the legislation provisions. Then several other guidelines or standing operating procedures are also provided. Now, another important aspect of this building block is the administrative aspect. It's also called that there should be an administrative mechanism in place with the required capacities to provide evaluation of whatever applications that is presented. Now, administrative can be quite wide. You find it could be the Biosafety Office. As we've had, we are going to have a speaker from the Kenya National Biosafety Agency who will be able to take you through this to give you an outlook of how this looks like. We'll have the National Biosafety Agency. With the National Biosafety Agency, we'll have other smaller organs, inspectors. We have biosafety officers. We'll have quite a number that a particular or a specific legislation for a country may provide. Now, this, in essence, all work towards implementing or seeing the best practice that is expected under international law or under the national legislation. So they have to work to complement each other. So that's the importance of administrative mechanism has to be placed as parts and parcel of these building blocks. Now, coming to Africa, you ask yourself, we ask ourselves, what are the drivers to biosafety regulation on the continent of Africa? We are a continent, a block of 55 nations. That those are countries that have been have their jurisdictions recognized, so to say, 55 member states. Now, Africa is being, most cases, I should say, to sound diplomatic, that we have an organization, an intergovernmental organization, which is the African Union. And the African Union has other organs, like one where I belong to, which is the African Union Development Agency, which is mandated to provide the technical interface to this kind of developments that are happening on the continent. So Africa over the years have also had its intense conversation in follow-up of what happens in the global scene in regard to adoption of modern biotechnology. Now, you may recall that we as a continent is a continent that has had challenges in generally most of the sectors. You may mention health, you mention agriculture, you mean many other areas where biosciences have offered solutions to. So in the decades behind us, the conversation on the continent by the policymakers has been to transform Africa, and agriculture being one other big sector that attracts or employs a huge members of the African public. Agriculture has been properly analyzed to find out the challenges that the sector faces, sectors such as the vagaries of drought, pests and diseases, and many more. So in a bid to step up this productivity, conversation and the corridors of the organization, of course, that brings together heads of states and governments, the Council of Ministers. Their position has been consistent to see that Africa adopts technologies that will spur the productive sector in agriculture. Meaning, if we increase the agriculture productivity, we are bound to raise up the other areas. We are bound to create employment. We are bound to improve our GDPs as countries. We are bound to create employment for the youths, which is the vast majority. So conversation around Africa has led to the adoption of policy positions. And one key such policy position is the development agenda, that is Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. It is as a lifespan of 50 years that started from 2013 up to 2063. The Africa we want in its aspirations calls for an Africa that is envisaged to be based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Africa will be amongst the best performers in global quality of life. This is aspiration one. This will be attained through increasing agricultural production, investments in science, technology, and research and innovation. It makes a further call in aspiration 13 that Africa's agriculture will be modern, productive, using science, technology, and innovation. So when you read through all the 13 aspirations of Agenda 2063, you will find that science, technology, innovation, and research is placed at the epicenter of Africa's socio-economic transformation. So you find that that alone is, as a policy position, is the driver towards having a safe application of the tools of modern biotechnology. Now, precursor to this position in Agenda 2063, early enough, the Commission, that's the African Union Commission, actually commissioned a panel of experts, which was headed by none other than Professor Callistus Juma, a Kenyan son of the soil, may his soul rest in peace. In that report that they came up as a panel entitled The Freedom to Innovate, basically trying to scope around the technologies that Africa should zero on. And biotechnology in their findings was recognized to be one tool that could really provide a very good solution to some of the challenges. It did not make this as a silver bullet, but it also made strong recommendations towards the safe application, meaning there has to be regulation in place to co-evolve with the technology. So the Freedom to Innovate, a report in 2007, was then adopted by heads of states and governments at the summit, and hence it's the driver towards seeing member countries, supporting member countries of the Union to harness technologies, especially in biosciences, biotechnology being one of them, in a safe way to mitigate some of the challenges that face the continent. There are a number of other policy positions that came up, which is the CADIP. I think some of you, our audience here, might have come across CADIP, all looking towards having improved agriculture in order to have enough food to overcome the challenges of food insecurity for the 1.3 billion population of the continent. Now, recent decisions came up in further panel reports. We have the panel of experts continuing, where they've come up with positions of new other emerging technologies. One such technology is the gene drive. Then another upcoming report, which we hope very soon, is one on genome editing, other tools which are making other further improvements to other life sciences. So one that I would like to draw attention to is a decision of the Assembly in 2017, which is decision 6049 at the ordinary sitting of heads of states and governments in Addis Ababa, which did recognize how an important role the gene drive technology could play towards developing a tool which could make us join other tools to fight this malaria challenge, which is spread predominantly by the mosquitoes. We have several species of mosquitoes, but we know that the female anopheles mosquito in this part of our region has really been a very, very dangerous, causing a lot of ravage, loss of lives, and also shooting up budgetary needs for nations in the region, where we lose huge. And as a result, heads of states and government in this decision did recognize an important role this research could play once research is allowed. And it implored the Union and African Union Development Agency to work closely with the World Health Organization and other partners to find that research happens so as we get this product out as one of the tools that we have alongside others in the fight against malaria. Now here I will flash to you the map of our continent that tries to reflect the current status of biosafety. Now there's quite a lot that determines our assessment as a continental watchdog or a continental service provider for member states to make us see the status, the landscape of biosafety regulation on the continent. We look at this in terms of the products that on the ground, the events or the traits that are being developed in the research, and those that are even in the commercial release that have attained the required regulatory assessment and approval to have them put out there on the market to be used just like the other conventional relatives. So here to begin with, before I show you the trade developments on the continent in some of the countries, the map of the continent here shows three major characters. The first character, if we start from the bottom, are countries that have not yet pulled off the building blocks that I've talked about in the earlier slides. I mentioned policy, legislation, having in place possibly other regulations or guidelines, and also having the administrative apparatus or mechanism in place in order to be able to make decisions for safe deployment of these materials or these products. Now, this map is a reflection of this development, the development of the building blocks that I've talked about, which meets the standard of having a biosafety regulatory framework. Now, countries that are bearing blue here on the map of our continent are countries that we can conclude have not really made that significant progress in terms of putting in place those building blocks. You may find some have just one block. Yes, I don't rule out. You find some countries have a focal point, which focal point would be some point significant because it links up the national setting to the secretariat of the convention. So you find some nations have gone full length to have what is minimum, to have those 3-5 blocks, the policy, the legislation, but they have not taken any step, or they have not yet received an applications for these deliberate introductions, either for research or for even commercial release. They have not. But you will have, there are countries that have actually put in place these blocks, and they have an operational administrative system whereby they receive applications from prospective investors or scientists. They run research. They even have products on the market or products ready for release. Now, significantly, these have been distinguished by these colors: the blue that have not made significant efforts, green that have made significant efforts, but they have not yet gone to a level of receiving possibly an application, or their regulatory system has not yet been tested, in so saying that they have not yet approved or put any product around, which is known. I should emphasize that. The green with the golden stars have gone further. They're even having approvals. They're having research. They're having approvals. Even they have products in the market which more or less compete with other conventional relatives. We have countries that we can call out now. We have South Africa. I think Eswatini, it is formerly Swaziland, has joined that league. We have Ethiopia, we have Sudan. Burkina Faso was there, only that they ran through a slight stalemate, but they're picking up. The conversation is gaining momentum in Burkina Faso. Nigeria has made several approvals, I think 3 approvals now, the BT cotton, and also I think the cowpea, where I think they are still undergoing research or performance trials. Kenya, I think the country in which we are, is made quite considerable progress, and the regulatory agency is going to speak about this. Malawi has made progress, and we'll see the trade progress which are there. So really a lot of progress has been made on the continent, I must say, in terms of regulatory landscape and in terms of the trade and crops that are here. Now, the next slide will launch me at us looking at the trades country by country that we have on the continent. Here we begin Burkina Faso. I know time may not be our best ally, but we can see Burkina Faso talks about cowpea, talks about rice, cotton. We have, these are the areas, it's the traits that are intended to improve insect resistant, bacterial blight disease resistant. These are the agencies that are running this in those countries. We have INERA, is their National Scientific Research Agency. AATF is also in support in the country about this. We have them here. Then the status at which these products are. Some are now in what they call multi-locational trials. We have confined field trials, and even the cotton for long had been on general release, save for the hiccup that the country went through, and also the slight instability that was not able to allow policymakers come to make a decision in order to drive processes forward. We have Cameroon, we have Eswatini, we have Ethiopia. All these have something to talk about. Cotton, Cameroon has had cotton research, I think, through the agency organization called Bayer. Eswatini is running cotton. I think they're even doing commercial cotton now. Ethiopia very recently have made very serious progress, started from cotton. Then they came to maize. I think the approvals that are ongoing, which is quite very impressive, and it has garnered the positive momentum within the eastern region here. We have other countries. We can talk of Ghana that has had a number of research which has gone on. Kenya has quite a number of research that is here. You can see. We can talk of cotton, maize, which is Fulfilla. We have maize mon 846, maize mon 810. I know the presenter in the next presentation is going to speak quite about the sweet potato, sorghum, banana, cassava. It's been quite, you can say, remarkable in Kenya. So this reflects by events what the continent has made it through. This that I'm trying to show you is as at March 2022. All this that I'm showing as at March 2022, it might have begun almost a decade ago in some countries or more, but this is as of March 2022. We talk of Malawi here, we see cowpea, we see cotton, which is MON 15985. We talk of banana in some of their research institutes, the universities, Luna University, I think, working together here. Then we have also Luna. All these technologies are taking root on the continent. We see Mozambique here. It's also maize. It's a drought tolerance. It's the Lepidopteran, the insect resistance. AATF as one of those partners working together with the local agency. This is at CFT level. All these are, most of them are at CFT level. Nigeria, you see here. Nigeria has cotton, sorghum, cowpea, cassava, rice, maize. All, they are either in the research as confined field trials, but some have actually received approval for commercial release, like the cotton. You see the cowpea also approved for commercial release as of March 2022. We have others for CFT, which is the rice, and then the other maize, which is the NK603 times, that's MON 810, it's for multi-locational trials. Rwanda is a new and recent entrant, and they have taken on cassava as one of their food security solutions. The research is heightened. It's conducted by the Rwanda Agriculture and Animal Research Development Board. It's at confined field trial. And I will tell you this, that as I speak, my director who was to actually interface with you in this presentation today, but assigned me to stand in for him, is with the team of AUDA-NEPAD in Rwanda for a high policy engagement, because the country wants to fast track its policy and legislation to have some of these crops rolled out for commercial, possible commercial use, and also for spurring its development trajectory, because you know cassava with it comes quite a number of products, not only the food, but comes with it other products for industrial use. We know South Africa has been in this for long, for nearly now heading towards almost 22 decades, but they have maize, cotton, which I think are for commercial already released, and there is research also going on in other fields. I think it's quite very clear, with a very clear, well-defined bioeconomy policy as a country. So in many discussions where Africans meet together as the Africa bloc, often at times South Africa makes itself clear about their development trajectory. If the other African countries try to develop cold feet, for them having known what their benefits are and what they have earned so far from this the technologies, they always stand out clear that yes, we stand with Africa, but this is our national position because we have a benefit, we have a huge sector that employs a huge number of our investments. So that's what stands with South Africa. So Sudan has been in this for long, and they have actually stuck in cotton. We know this insect-resistant cotton. The technology from China, it's released long time, and its products actually feed the Chinese textile industry. So you can see what the market dynamics can bring for the continent. Tanzania, until a couple of years ago, where there's an application of some breaks by the top echelon of the political brass to slow up progress and perhaps to change their development trajectory to the conventional breeding. Tanzania had done research, had done its research, quite a lot of research, very progressive research, very progressive research on maize, which was drought tolerant trade, and AATF worked closely with the COSTECH, and this was at CFT level until when it was halted. But the good news coming from Tanzania is very recently, I think this year, there is a new policy that has come up, and it's positive towards technology. And it does recognize that technology is evolving. Actually, the country realizes that it's important for technology to progress. So I think it's of interest for all partners to look at the developments coming up in Tanzania, how much it's going to influence policy decision. But it's very recent policy that has been reviewed and pronounced to the public. Uganda, I think this is where I will end. Amongst these examples, as the moderator tried to put out, I think Uganda stands out a record. I don't know whether this has not been challenged of recent, given the positive momentum happening within the region, to a country to have had the highest number of confined field trials south of the Sahara, several of them. Now, you can see all these have been successful, most of them, if not all, successful, and some have been done with close relations with our sister country, that is Kenya, especially when you talk about the Vica cassava, which is the virus research for cassava for Africa. Really, a lot of research has been done in banana. You find banana that is parasitic to nematode, that has nutritional enhancement, vitamin A. Cotton has been done, sweet potatoes, maize, rice, soybean, all this. But you read through the slides that the requirement for us to have these processes taken through is to have legislation in place which provides for these products to be utilized, not only at research level, but also the commercial release level. So the country is yet trying to grapple with the challenge of having an explicit legislation which will see these products maybe one time come out of the shelf, but go for commercial release. So that launches me into looking at the other segment of the question that I've been asked to talk about. The topic was after discussing the status or the landscape of the regulatory framework on the continent, what are the best practices and guidance? Now you're able to analyze or look through the best practice and guidance, especially if you have had interaction with all these players. And as a body that is the African Biosafety Network of Expertise, a program with the AUDA-NEPAD, with the mandate to support African countries, the last 15 or nearing 2 decades, we have had close interaction with a number of countries, and our network has grown so big on the continent. And we do realize that there are other areas that really guidance and which could be given to ensure best practices. First and foremost, we identify that the policies countries should put in place should really be very clear. There shouldn't be any ambiguity in the policy provisions, and also no ambiguity in the legislative drafting, legislative provisions that are to come into force to enable, to create an enabling environment for all players in this. You find challenge that we encounter is since policies are more political and they face the competition of other choices, that competing kind of narratives, you find often some policies do not come out clear to define what the country wants, that development trajectory the country wants to take. Then once it creates an ambiguity, you find that the legislation also bears the ambiguity that comes with it. And most times we find that the legislations end up being restrictive, meaning deterrent to taking the benefits of the technology, rather than it tries to bar the technology taking place. So from that, we say let technology, and it's the position of Africa Union that technology and regulation must co-evolve. We understand the need for regulation, but also the need for technology, because the technologies, some of them provide an edge towards our challenges. We talk about pests and diseases that have ravaged many aspects of agriculture. We talk about the drought that we are failing to deal with. Now, if we have a product such as the drought-tolerant maize, now maize is a food security crop. So really, if we have a drought-tolerant maize that can come up, so meaning we have to assess the technology and look at the technology and the regulation in order to co-evolve to get the best so as to have this. We should avoid texts and language in the legislation which create regulatory hurdles, and that is a challenge. I will not mention names of countries, but you find the country provides and also takes it away in the same legislation. It provides and then it has a clawback, meaning the regulation or the legislation remains in vain. It does not achieve anything. Now we look at also in this, I will join that legislation should not create an overly cautious approach where it creates more liability regimes to make every aspect liable, and punishment in a very harsh way. Certainly that will be deterrent to having a technology uptake. It will deny uptaking the technology. Then there is a need for outreach. I think there are partners who could be here on this platform and in this series, and more so I want to believe this very platform. Outreach is key. I would like to emphasize that through outreach, we are able to always heal some of those doubting, and to also to provide key clarity, which is very important in many of these conversations where you find there has been that obstinate, lukewarm approach or adoption of some of these technologies. So we have to look at our development goals. We look at our development trajectory. We emphasize, we tell the public out there, this is a product. Let's tell a story that allows, which is positive, not a story that closes down the technology. Then another key aspect in my guidance and as a best practice is also stewardship. Stewardship remains key, meaning if you have this product on your table, you have now the product at the final stage, it's released, then you should go a step further to harness these processes. How do they go about it? How do the players go about it? So as to maintain the integrity that comes with that particular product, in order to let it stand the test of time. But once the product is out there, you not play well, steward it well, then it will get bad. And then when it gets bad, it plays into the hands of groups that always that speak otherwise about the technology. So having a stewardship plan provided to the regulator is key, and it's our emphasis that the regulator, in getting to some stage of this development, should always emphasize that the stewardship plan should be very clear. Madam Moderator, all participants or listeners, I think I'm going to end here, and I'll be ready and willing to take questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sunday, for that detailed presentation on the legal framework and its status. We are not doing very well with time. Maybe I'll just give 2 minutes. If there are any burning questions, participants, can you ask? We'll just get 2, and then the rest, please make use of the chat box to bring up the questions or comments that you have. Okay, silence means, is it okay? Is it clear? Let us see from the chat box if you can have that. Maybe we'll take more questions after the second presentation so that we'll catch up with time. So if you have any question, maybe just take note of the question, and when it comes to after the second presenter, then we'll have the time that we can ask all the questions that we have, and we can make all the comments that we need. At this moment, let me request Dr. Loy Mugiira to give a presentation. But before he does, let me introduce Dr. Loy Mugiira. He is the acting Chief Executive Officer for the National Biosafety Authority, NBA for Kenya. Dr. Mugiira was the Director of Technical Services at NBA. He holds a PhD in diagnosis of plant viruses infections based on the alignment of their DNA sequences. Furthermore, he has research experience in cloning viral DNA genome into gene silencing vector for application in functional genomic. Dr. Mugiira played a key role in developing Kenya biotechnology development policy and biosafety regulatory framework of genetically modified organisms. He is a member of the Biosafety Risk Assessment Panel of experts for the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. He has a wide experience in policy advisory for the governance of science, technology, and innovation, generally and biotechnology development specifically. Thank you. So, Dr. Roy, can you please, this is your time. You have about, I'll reduce to 25 minutes presentation so that we can have time for questions and comments. Over to you, Roy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Lilian, Madam Facilitator. It is a pleasure to be within this forum. And thank you for that very generous kind of introduction. That leaves nothing more to add about myself. I will go straight to make the presentation that I have prepared, which focuses largely on Kenya's preparedness and guidelines on genome editing as a way of catching up with emerging technologies. If you allow me, therefore, Madam Facilitator, I should be able to share my screen, and I will ask that you confirm from your end if you are able to see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lilian. Once again, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to make this presentation. I want to highlight key aspects of Kenya's genome editing regulatory framework, which is based on a guideline. Also to emphasize that genome editing is a new, rather emerging technology, which is not covered within the conventional biosafety acts that we developed. And therefore, as an authority, we had to look for a way of giving some guidance to applicants on how to approach this emerging technology. As basically a background, genome editing proceeds in two possible ways, actually, four. There is a possibility that after genome editing, you end up with an insertion of a foreign DNA, and that one becomes a classical GMO, and therefore it is regulated within the framework of the Cartagena Protocol and also within the framework of Kenya's Biosafety Authority and Biosafety Act. Now, at other times when you are involved in a long temperature replacement, a procedure that is in short referred to as SDN3, you end up again with an insertion of a DNA fragment, and therefore this is a category that becomes of interest in terms of regulation under the Biosafety Act. The other instances, a short template and even a random mutation, which results to not GMO or certain procedures that intermediate sections have GM, but then the final product is GM. What we have done, therefore, as an authority is to provide guidance on how to regulate activities relating to genome editing, right from the research stage all the way to the level of commercialization. Sorry, my slides are not moving. I want to see why this is. Yes, yes. I hope the slides are moving on your end. So in the objective of the guidelines, therefore, is to cover the absence of a substantive law on genome editing, which is again an ongoing discussion even at the global level. So the guidelines are designed to provide technical guidance to applicants on the criteria for determining which genome editing organisms or their derived end products are regulated under the Biosafety Act. So basically is to tell these ones are regulated under the Biosafety Act, these ones are not regulated under the Biosafety Act. The key features of Kenya's genome editing guidelines include one, an early consultation stage, where the applicant fills out a simple form providing information and data that facilitate decision making. Basically, this is a very simple form where the applicant says, this is the technology, this is the anticipated results, these are the data that was collected in terms of whether the end product is GMO or not, and then this facilitates decision making. The other key feature is an expeditious timeline, about 30 days for decision making at the early consultation stage, where we quickly look through and scan through the data that has been provided, and then a quick decision is made that this would fall within the category that would be regulated under the Biosafety Act, or this would fall within the category that is regulated under other laws or that is outside the GMO, the Biosafety Act. Number three, the other feature is a clear flow of steps on consideration of the various options on the basis of information and data that is provided. So we have a flow chart that I'll be going to show in a short while, which will tell this is what we look for, this is how the decision flows, and this is what the final decision would look like. And finally, the guidelines have a categorization of genome editing outcomes expected to be regulated under the Biosafety Act. So it is very clear that this outcome, therefore, falls under the Biosafety Act. This outcome does not fall under the Biosafety Act. When we scan around the world, we have seen similar approach taken by quite a number of countries, including India, Argentina, and I think recently I saw from Nigeria as well. This is the approach that has been taken globally, that of an earlier consultation and a determination of what kind of approach that will be taken to regulate processes of genome editing. Now, using the Biosafety Act, because we cannot operate in a vacuum and we cannot store research projects. the authority has approved the following 11 projects, which are at the research level. Basically, we used the Biosafety Contained Use Regulations under the Biosafety Act to approve these projects that are at experimental levels. Number one is the African swine fever vaccine. This is a project that is seeking to develop a vaccine yes, did I hear some voices? The African swine fever vaccine. The other project is the goat for trypanosome resistance. These are two are animal kind of genome editing projects. Then we also have a project that is seeking to develop sorghum that is resistant to striga. Striga is a parasitic weed that destroys sorghum and maize. And then we have a project on grass pea, also a genome editing project on grass pea and sorghum that is being edited to resist anthracnose. And then we also have a project on yam, which seeks to enhance vitamin A content and also to instill disease resistance. We have cassava for nutritional enhancement, banana for nano and the viruses and aphids resistance. And we have also cassava for early flowering for purposes of enhancing breeding in cassava, which is largely vegetatively propagated. And then we also have banana for fungal and bacteria resistance. And finally, we have potato for potato virus Y resistance. So these are going on within various institutions within Kenya, and we applied the contained use regulations under the Biosafety Act to approve these projects. Now, the scope of the genome editing guidelines that we published in March in Kenya is applied to genome edited plants, animals, and microorganisms. The guidelines, in line with the provisions of the Cartagena Protocol and the Biosafety Act, has provided exemptions to they are not therefore applicable to pharmaceuticals that are for use in animal health and that are regulated separately by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. The flow of consideration is represented in this flowchart. At the start, the applicant makes an application, then we conduct early consultations, and we check for completeness. I think these are standard administrative processes. Then if is there integration of foreign DNA, if the answer is yes, then we go on to ask, is the foreign DNA sequence present in the end product? If the answer is yes, then this is treated as a genetically modified organism. Notification is given to the applicant that this will be regulated under the Biosafety Act, going through the full risk assessment procedure. Now, if there is no integration of foreign DNA, then this is treated as a non-GMO, and the same is communicated to the applicant that the product is outside the regulation of the Biosafety Act. And when we conclude that it is a GMO, we also notify relevant regulatory agencies that partner with possible scenarios or outcomes of the consideration within the early consultations. Scenario A is a determination by NBA that the genome edited organism or product has no foreign genetic material, that the applicant is informed, and therefore this is exempt from the regulatory framework of GMOs. Scenario 2 is a determination by NBA that the genome edited organism or product has foreign genetic material. Therefore, the applicant is guided to make a full application that follows a full risk assessment under the Biosafety Act. The kind of provisions for review, we recognize that this is a never evolving technology, and this is regularly changing scenarios. we have provided for the review of the guidelines. Also considering, colleagues, that genome editing is providing us an opportunity for co-evolution of the technology with the regulatory framework, as opposed to GMO technology, which we first started by developing regulations and laws before the technology was in the table. So on the basis of that, therefore, we have indicated that the genome editing guidelines may be reviewed based on new scientific information. And further, we have also given the Biosafety Authority ourselves the reserve, the right to alter decisions if new scientific information previously unknown becomes available. So if there is new information that may become available, then we have left room for purposes of reviewing our decisions. So basically, colleagues, that is what the regulatory provisions or guidelines for genome editing look like. And I want to thank you very much for your attention and for the privilege to make a presentation in this meeting. Thank you. Back to you, facilitator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loy, for that presentation and for being in time. Colleagues, now the floor is open for questions. I saw there is the one question in the chat. It's saying, how are the policymakers engaging the public in debate around genome editing in order to manage any misconception and ensure consumer confidence? So this is for you, Dr. Roy. And there is also another one. It says, are there any regional regulatory harmonization in place on the continent? I'm sure this is for you, Sandy. Yeah, so we can start. Sunday, you can start. There is a question on whether there is regional regulatory harmonization in place.
Thank you.
Sunday,
Thank you.
yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you, Madam Lillian. Yes. At the height of this conversation, at the global scene, you realize that the instruments that have been adopted and that have come into force, so to say, in this case, the Cartagena Protocol, signatories or nations that have become parties undertake to domesticate these instruments within their national jurisdictions. Now, further, we are a continent that you'll find we have regional agencies that are in place and which have become official, recognized by African Union. We have regions such as, okay, to begin with, we have the East Africa region here. We have the COMESA region. We have the SEDEC region for the Southern Group. We have the ECOWAS region. Then we have the SEALs. We have the ECAS. ECAS is for the Central Africa. Then we have the one that is the North, predominantly the Arab North. All these groups are there and recognized by the African Union. So you can see the workout is that they work to implement some of the activities and programs of the Union so as to avoid duplicity. So conversations at the Union, even around regulations, get themselves harmonized. But to begin with, the regional groupings have moved steps forward to shape up, I think, regional harmonization. To begin with, I think COMESA, which draws together about 21 member states, right deep into Mauritius, up to Libya, I think, if I can be corrected. They came up with what they call the COMBIB. I think that is the COMESA Biotech and Biosafety policy, which was a step towards having a harmonious regional harmonization. I think the conversation around that is going, and COMESA is reorganizing itself to take that further. Recently, we received communication from their leadership to seeking the support of African Union Development Agency to see how we can work together in doing that. The ECOWAS has moved a step further than other regions on the continent by having actually a common guideline, which is right now awaiting the endorsement of the Council of Ministers on Science and Technology. You can see, which we also, the AUDA-NEPAD supported them in developing all the various positions they had. You know, ECOWAS has about 15 member nations, member countries, bringing aboard both French-speaking, that's the Francophone, and the Anglophone, and some Portuguese-speaking countries. So really it's difficult to have an harmonious setting, but to this point, I can say that they have a document which is to provide a regional regulatory framework for biosafety regulation within their region. And it's awaiting the summit to have heads of states, I think, to endorse it. We know very well that SADC had made progress when the early years, when they had the challenges of drought, and they had to bring in food supply, food supplements or food aid. I thought they went further to put in place guidelines for regulations, guidelines for movement, guidelines for laboratory testing, all these for all its member countries. And that is a step that they have taken, and we really hope they are going to take that further, especially the leadership that sits in Gaborone, Botswana. The East African region recently, I think, commissioned a consultant to validate the legislation in all these countries or member states to see what they have in terms of biosafety regulation. And that was presented to, I think, the Council of Science and Technology that sits in possibly Arusha or Kigali. One of those is there to look into this. And we also hope something to create an harmonious regional operation is going to come out of this. So to say that on the continent, the region of Africa, regions have been, the economic groupings have been working, and it's a hope that all that translates to also provide for a continental kind of framework, because biosafety regulation, if you look at the protocol, it is transboundary. You cannot control what can spill over into another jurisdiction. But it looks at the interaction of some of these materials with the biodiversity, so to say. So that's where I can end that question. Hope I've answered it properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, of course, there are several questions for you coming up, but maybe we can give a chance to Roy. So you can also be checking through the chat box. The next one was for Roy, on how are the policymakers engaging public in debate around gene editing in order to manage any misconception and ensure consumer confidence.
Thank you, Facilitator, and thank you, Beatrice, for this question. I want to reframe this a little, with the permission of Beatrice, the scientist, because our first audience, our first stop are the policymakers. In fact, you will find we know quite a bit as scientists, even the two possibilities or three possibilities that I've talked about in terms of outcomes of genome editing technology, the policymakers are not yet up there. In fact, when we engaged a few in Kenya, they were asking us, the other day you were telling us about GMOs. Now you guys are telling us about genome editing. You want to edit life out of, so first, the policymaker needs to be informed first before they can even engage the public. And that is the starting point. What we have done under the Open Forum for Agricultural Biotechnology, OFAB, we have initiated programs that are geared towards developing a communication strategy for genome editing. Remember, we had the similar difficulties with the GMO technology. And this time, we are trying to develop a consortium. In fact, the African Biosciences Communication Conference, popularly referred to as the ABBC, has proposed a consortium that will come up with ways that we can frame our messages to avoid these preconceptions. So again, Beatrice, it is not the policymakers, I could say that they also need outreach to begin with. It is the scientists and the product makers to first of all reach out to the policy makers and eventually to the public with messages that are that will avoid the kind of misconceptions that have come previously with our experience with the GE technology. Thank you, Willie, for this question. You asking whether these guidelines will apply to gene drive. Whereas the guidelines are general in terms of the outcomes of the initial discussions. They would apply even for gene drive, because the question that we're asking is, are the products ending up with transgene? Are there intermediary steps where transgenes are transgenic organisms are created and then they are removed? And one of the things that we will look at when considering a gene drive research project is to look at the regulatory elements. You know, gene drives largely is the inclusion of enhanced regulatory elements to enhance gene expression. So what we ask at the end of it, are these elements now out of the end product? And if they are out again, this will not have foreign gene, and therefore is classically not a GMO. But if these elements are retained, which is usually the case in gene drive research, then this falls within the classical transgene or gene genetic engineering, and therefore will be regulated within the contained use regulations of the Biosafety Act. Thank you. Back to you, facilitator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roy. Sunday, there are two more questions for you in the chat. Hope you have seen it.
Yes, I've seen them.
Yes,
the question from Linga, Richard.
Yeah.
Yes, is questioning as to what happens from the point of us always receiving these technologies late. Possibly we are ill prepared wherever they come from, especially from the West or now from the East. And how prepared are we in terms of regulations, frameworks before their deployment? Yes, that's a challenge, but most of these new emerging technologies, new breeding techniques, you call them, I think the protocols are clear. And at some point, those within the realm of health, the protocols are even shared, I think, with WHO before the approval for public consumption. Now, even these that are for the crop biotech, you realize that the regulatory agency, like this of Dr. Mugiira Roy, very much will receive or demand for information about such materials to be able to understand them before they grant an approval for either CFT or for any commercial release. So all that kind of period that is provided, is availed for all actors, enables persons or individuals or authority to put in place the requisite, the regulatory mechanisms. And besides, oftentimes they suggest what should be done that is revealed in the risk assessment approaches. Normally, you have to tender in a risk assessment, a report, and how risks can be managed. So all that can inform the regulator on how some of this can be managed. They can go a step further from the information, the dossier provided by the applicant, and most cases it has to be within the regulation. You had the Dr. Mugiira question that in some countries, the questioning is whether genome edited materials or crops are within the definition that is found under the Cartagena Protocol. Is there any transgenic introduction into some of these materials, or it's just within, you know? So really, that does really give you a picture of where regulation, and I also do concede And that's what we are there for. The African Union tries to support member countries. When you talk of training, you're talking of support in terms of regulatory knowledge, funding, or challenges. You know, yes, these are all challenges, but we have offered capacity building opportunities for several either regulators. So we take them to the best places where they get the best hands-on training to get to find the best. The second question, I hope that one answers you, Richard. But the second question is to Dr. Tony Willie, is trying to question whether the West African, that acronym stands for the West Africa Integrated Vector Management Guidelines. Yes, whether it will spread out to all of Africa. No, this is not meant specifically for West Africa. Now, it was a challenge of having the whole continent organized to venture into this understanding of the new technology and how it has to be regulated. Now, you will agree with me that the West Africa ECOWAS has quite a robust and well-tested in vector, I think, vector management agency, I think, for West Africa. Possibly it's based in Burkina Faso. And it was around this agency that the union, the leadership thought that this, to grow the whole IVM program, should begin around a group that has been there, then to grow it across Africa. So for now, as I speak, guidelines have been developed, and in last December, all the focal persons, the technical working groups gathered in Accra, and the guidelines were adopted, though with room for other amendments. Now, these coming years, we are moving to other regions, especially the COMESA region. Then possibly we'll bring on SADC, we'll bring on the Central Africa. Then North. Actually, it's growing big to become an Africa-wide thing. And the guidelines are meant to be, they are not cast in stone, but they will be improved as the technology improves. But at least something is there to begin with, and it has begun with the West Africa group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunday and Dr. Roy. Maybe if there are still some questions. Okay, I am getting something. This comment from Wile, that's to both. Could there be a group in Africa currently working on
engineered gene drives? Yes. Hello? Hello?
Did we lose Lillian?
Have we lost Lillian?
Yeah, I think we have lost her. But the question is to both. Could there be a group in Africa currently working on engineered gene drive crops or animals other than mosquitoes?
I made an attempt to answer that by text, and I can see Willie has seen that. Basically, I'm not aware of any, and I have referred the question to, or the Dr. Tonui to the International Service for the Acquisition of Agribiotech Applications, acronymed ISA, for information on this. I'm quite sure that Dr. Karembu of ISA would be having this kind of information. Thank you.
We have lost Lillian, but I think we can proceed. There are other prompts. For instance, this goes out to Dr. Roy. And a point of concern was, or a point of interest is, does Kenya conduct regular biosafety training? Or if these trainings are available to ensure capacity exists in national biosafety structures, because recently Africa has been faulted for lacking capacity in regulatory affairs, especially in these new emerging biotechnologies. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think I wrote.
Lilian is back.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. I think my network just went off. Thank you very much. Maybe there were some questions where I was off.
Yes,
Dr.
indeed.
Roy?
I'm responding to one that has been put across by your colleague. Yes, indeed. This aspect of capacity. Every time we try to make any move in this area, there are questions that Africa lacks capacity, Kenya lacks capacity, Nigeria lacks capacity. It is a returning kind of, if I could put it as an excuse, really, because a lot of our education institutions, and particularly higher learning institutions, the universities, have trained very many people in this field, particularly in classical biotechnology. What your colleague has asked is relating to regulatory affairs. As NBA, we conduct regular training for staff in laboratories that are conducting research in GM technology. And we do this even before we approve these projects. For example, when International Livestock Research Institute submits an application, one of the requirements is that we train or take through the staff in the lab through a training process, emphasizing the need for compliance with the regulatory requirements. We have also partnered with various partners, including the Africa Union NEPAD and Program for Biosafety System, PBS, to enhance capacity within our regulatory agencies. Through that program, we have been able to put specific officers in our regulatory agencies. For example, the National Environment Management Authority, the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, and the others, so that we have competency in assessing applications for either environmental release or even contained use of GM technology in these institutions. So basically, the simple answer is yes, we conduct regular training, both as an authority and through partnership with our close partners and also our universities. Back to you, facilitator.
Okay, thank you for that. And another question directed towards Sunday Akile. So this is, rather than a question, is a comment. As a program officer for legal and policy, will you comment whether the political leadership, especially in many African countries, is favorable in implementation of this policy that will enable harnessing of science and technology and innovation STIs? So is the political leadership favorable, or is it mitigates this development in these STIs? Especially,
yes. Well, yes, I think we have noted quite with some quite interest. Assessment has shown that countries are beginning to harness technologies with interest, especially science, technology, and innovation with keen interest. Yes, as I did in my talk about our policy position, which is the grand vision that drives us for the next 50 years. That's Agenda 2063. But even precursor to that, you realize that the policy positions for transformation of Africa's agriculture and the health sector and many other sectors, especially these that speak to these biosciences, or the biosciences speak to this new, has been high on the agenda, you know, even at the heads of summits, let's say heads of government and states and other organs of the union. You find this has been quite intense, and you find that these policies always speak to the common vision of these heads of states and governments, championed by Rwanda, championed by all these here, the leaderships, and here and there. You find that I'm really impressed. I'm beginning to see that the new crop of leadership is beginning to look at science, technology, innovation, and research being very key towards our socioeconomic transformation. And it's clearly reflected in the Agenda 63, when I said that science, if you read all the aspirations, 13 aspirations, you find it places science, research, innovation, technology at the epicenter of our socioeconomic transformation. So we can conclude that there's a dawn of hope that we are going to have this. And I'm saying this because when Callistus Juma and the panel of experts, may his soul rest in peace, came up with that report, that freedom to innovate, it was that report in 2007 that saw a lot of things happen. The AMCOST, which is the African Council of Ministers on Science and Technology, sat, and it's from the meeting of that summit, that council, that my program, which is the African Biosafety Network of Expertise, was baptized. And actually it was articulated that a body such as AUDA-NEPAD should be put in place to begin supporting African countries in putting in place capacities, systems that will harness some of this data. And that stemmed from Callistus Juma's panel of experts report, which was then adopted by the AUC, and then it came to the summit. Now we are seeing other decisions coming up. The decision on gene drives, which is 2017, and it was clear, arising from a report of the APET, which is also a high-level policy expert team. When they recognized, they actually mapped out 3 technologies: the drones, they marked out microgrids, and then the gene drives. That these 3 technologies stand at the edge in taking Africa to another level. And a decision in regarding the gene, I think Dr. Willie Tonui will bear with me that we've shared this report with him many times. A decision was made on the summit of heads of states and governments. And it's riding on that decision that now the current progress on the content we are tracking, we are trying to see what happens. Even at the international negotiations, just recently, a month ago in Geneva, Africa had a firm position. You see now, those are policymakers, had a firm position in regard to these emerging technologies, where they want Africa to be. And the consistency Africa has put, it's convincing that the leadership, unless there'll be some distortions that may come on the way, but I'm seeing there is that unison that we are looking at science, technology, and innovation to be primer to our socioeconomic transformation. Yes. Thank you.
I'd like to add a word to that, basically to underscore the key role that science is expected to play in Africa, with the STISA 2024 as a strategy for Africa in harnessing science and technology. In the area of biosciences, and particularly the genetic engineering, I am aware that Africa is revising its position on the aspect of the model law. You will recall that when we started negotiations around the Cartagena Protocol, Africa Union published what was called the model law for Africa, which was seen to be very precautionary. And I am aware that is being revised with a view to making it more robust for purposes of enhancing Africa's uptake of agrobiotechnologies for food security and industrial development. Back to you again, facilitator.
Thank you for that. I think in this, I will hand over to Lillian. Lillian, please.
Thank you very much for taking up. I wonder if the audience still have comments.
Yes, and I saw a second question. I don't know whether there's a question that was said, one of the primer questions, maybe briefly to say something about the AUDA-NEPAD, which is the African Biosafety Network of Experts. You had Dr. Mugiira talk about when it came to capacity building, yes. Yes, primarily the AUDA-NEPAD, which is the African Biosafety Network of Experts, its mandate from AMCOST, that's what I just talked about, the African Minister of Science and Technology, Council of Ministers, was to support member countries, yes, in building functional regulatory systems. You can see when the wording is functional, meaning you can have a regulation in place which may not be functional for one reason or the other, because it may be overly precocious, as Dr. Mugiira said. So really ours is to ensure that these systems are functional so that they create a balance between various actors and players or interested groups. Now, this is the third phase that the AUDA-NE has gone into. The first phase was 2010, 2015, then 2016, 2021, then this is into the third phase. And we are building on the successes we had in the other phases. And in those phases, I know we had our interaction and engagement with the many member states, Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania, all these countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I think we had the interaction with them. That's why you see the progress made in terms of regulation is reflected in the map of Africa that I shared earlier. To date, I can say, measuring from our output radar, our output radar really marks out countries that you clearly see that had the precocious laws, but they have now gone and revised the laws, revised policies, revised legislation, and put in place administrative mechanisms. And they are now running not only confining field trials, but they're also trying to make approvals for commercial release. Ethiopia is one of them. We have countries that move further to now have approvals, like Malawi. We talk of the cowpea, the banana that is Malawi, all these, the cotton, all those. We've seen, we have admired the progress Kenya is making. We've seen Nigeria making tremendous. So really, some countries have moved from having no legislation, no framework, having frameworks. Now, those having frameworks, they are gearing towards receiving applications. Those which had no applications are receiving applications, and they're now carrying on what they call the performance trials. So really, this is happening. So many can mention Mozambique, Malawi, Ethiopia, Nigeria, all these various status and landscapes. So this is all I can say, I think, in reflection on this, this particular question, that the frameworks that we've talked about, they are becoming now quite a normal thing on the continent. Even countries are calling, example is Rwanda. Rwanda, of all things, it is the head of state, the president, who wrote to the CEO of NEPAD a letter from the president calling upon the CEO to deploy his technical experts to go and support the country and see how the country can be helped to adopt some of these technologies. And that's how we got there. Fast-tracked the policies in the floor of parliament, the legislation, the draft is already there. So really, that's the process we say that can happen. Thank you very much. Hello, over to you, Lillian. Hello.
Sorry, Sunday, have you finished?
Yes, I finished.
Oh, sorry. I think I lost my connection again. Okay, so we had another one. Can you check in the chat on the involvement of indigenous people and local communities? Yeah, this should be the last one, the last question that we are going to address in this section. There is how are we doing with involvement of indigenous people and communities, local communities, in decision-making process for GMOs in Africa? So this one, Dr. Loy can also respond to this, especially that Kenya is one of the countries which do have IPLCs in place. Thank you, Dr. Loy.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. This is a tricky one. The other day we were sharing with stakeholders our report of national implementation to the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility. And one of the key issues that came out in the discussions with our stakeholders is how do we involve these indigenous peoples. We have quite a number that have been categorized under the UNESCO system, but it becomes difficult to go out there and call out and say, hey guys, come over here. and get involved. And then one of the weaknesses that I saw, which we need to work on, is evidence. What evidence can we table that indeed we involved these peoples or these groups of people in our processes? Can we say that by publishing an aspect in local newspapers that we have involved them? Can we say that by announcing it in the television we have done it? And the answer is no. There should be a systematic way of involvement. Kenya's constitution provides a very strong provision for public participation. And I think the key thing is a genuine, honest kind of public participation and involvement of these people. When we pick a representative, a person who is living in Nairobi, and the particular indigenous people are living in some island at the center of Lake Baringo, are we really genuine that by picking this representative, we have involved these peoples? So I think it's a structured thing. I can say that we are not yet there to say that we are really engaging them as is required of our constitution even, and we need to work on that. Then I've been asked, do we seek the informed consent from the indigenous people, I think, and local communities in the Kenyan guideline? The answer again is there isn't a framework. I will not say that we go to them to ask for this at the moment. We publish any of our decisions in the Kenya Gazette. We do it in the newspapers, and we also post it out there for any representation. But again, the question is that enough? And my answer is just like the answer you may be having. I don't want to say it, but this is quite obvious. Again, back to you, facilitator.
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, it's a challenge everywhere. For us, we don't have indigenous people, but we do have local communities. But we have not gone as far as to reach out to the real communities rather than just putting in the newspaper, which is not enough. So thank you very much for that.
So
okay, coming this.
Just briefly from the regional perspective, the continent. Yes, I like it. You know, this can best be said from the national setting, like Dr. Mugiira has given the example from its local setting. You are talking about Malawi, moderator. But from the continental perspective, for us, we say that the continent, Africa, is a home to a number of indigenous peoples and local communities. And the measure between them, their relation with the biodiversity has been viewed strongly in this conversation because it's regarded that they are the custodians of the biodiversity. So meaning in any consultations that they have to be. But also today we have reached the level of appreciating that technologies, these technologies have come not to destroy, but the narrative that technology has come to make better or even preserve some of these resources that they say they are custodian to. So for us as a union, what we say and really emphasize there should be a coexistence where the balance is gotten right. But the other intrinsic engagements is national engagements. Normally it's national legislations that provide for the platform for you to you map them out. Once you map them out, like you, because Malawi says they have only local communities, you map them out and then you know how you can engage in order to get consensus, to have a situation that will be all embracing in a co-evolutionary way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And at this moment, maybe it's time that we conclude our deliberation during this webinar. But before we close, let me thank you all our facilitators for your presentation and actually for the detailed explanation to the comments and the questions that have been provided. But I also have maybe a few take-home messages that we need to carry as we leave this meeting. First of all, if I look, I summarize the presentation which was made by Sunday on regulations, regulation for genetically modified organism. You ably took us through the history of biosafety regulations, where we are coming from, including the status where we are as the continent. What came out very clear is that regulations are there to ensure that there is safe application of modern biotechnology. And we also noted that Africa, for us to realize the Agenda 2063 of the Africa which we want, we have to embrace biotechnology, because we are agri-based, our economy is agri-based, and therefore we definitely will embrace biotechnology, which will help us to address most of the challenges that we face in agriculture. So we have issues of pests and diseases, and even now the climate change, and even the droughts, the floods which are coming with as effect of climate change. So the only way out, one way out of our challenges would be for us as Africa to embrace biotechnology. But how do we do that? We have to adopt those technologies which are safe. And how do we ensure that the regulations will help us to do that? And apart from the regulations themselves, we also do need to have institutional framework that will help us to implement the legal frameworks that we have put in place. We are, as Africa, we still have a long way to go as a continent, because from the look of things, we still have a lot of countries which have not yet developed the biosafety legal framework. And also there are still others who have the legal framework in place, but they have not seen to implement the framework because they are not approving anything. And for those who have not developed legal framework, I would like to urge you to do so, because even if you don't plant genetically modified organisms in your countries, still there is need to regulate what is coming in, because the Cartagena Protocol is about transboundary movement. Our borders are porous, and therefore we need to have the regulations in place, the legal framework in place to guide on how we can regulate products of biotechnology. There were some guidance and best practices which we have seen that will help us to, when we are coming up with our policies, they need to be to come up with a clear language in our policies, and also to avoid ambiguity. Sometimes we are challenged if our laws are contradicting, so we need really to come up with clear. And also the need for outreach. If we have the legal framework in place, make it known to the general public, make it known to the public, so that they comply to the biosafety legal framework. And also there's something like technology and regulation must evolve to get the best out of it. Technology is evolving rapidly, but maybe our legal framework are still lagging behind. For us to effectively regulate technology and their product, we need really to have technology that is evolving with regulations. Yes, so, and also they need to have the stewardship plan so that the product of the technology that we are embracing should stand the test of time. So that's about the presentation that was made by Sunday Akile. For Dr. Loy, thank you very much. You gave us an experience on development of genome editing and how genome edited products can be regulated. So the guidelines is highlighting the guidance which is anticipated for the Kenyan government to actually determine how to regulate products under genome editing. For those who have a novel gene in the product, we are hearing that they fall under the Cartagena Protocol and therefore they have to be regulated. And for those who don't have any novel gene, they are taken as conventional varieties and they are exempted from regulation. Genome editing is one of the technology which is fast growing and it is simple and even at small scale level, it is actually something that can be adopted. And therefore, we should expect as countries, as African countries, that there will be once in a time when we will be required to maybe we'll receive application for genome edited a product, or some researchers will do work around genome editing. So it's high time as countries that we come up with guidelines. If our legislation does not include genome edited products, maybe we can have guidelines which can complement our laws so that we can be guided on how to treat genome edited products, because some of the products does not contain novel genes, and according to the definition of GMOs under the Cartagena Protocol, it's when you have the novel gene in an organism, that's when you can regulate it. I hope with that, we are coming to the end of our webinar today. I just want to thank you, our facilitators, once again for showing up and also for sharing the experiences. I hope each one of us, we have learned something and something that we can take a step and try to implement in our respective countries. Reaching this far, thank you very much for your participation. Hoping to see you in the next webinar. Thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all and for a fruitful meeting, and thanks again. Till next time, we appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.